The whisper of shadows. I've never really believed in ghosts or curses until everything started unraveling around me. This is a story of revenge from beyond the grave, and it's all too real for me now. It began when I moved into my grandfather's old house after he passed away. He was a kind man, but there were whispers in the family about his younger days, about a business partner he'd wronged. My grandfather was a successful businessman, but his partner, George, was not as fortunate. The story goes that after a deal went south, my grandfather ended up with everything, leaving George penniless and broken. George died soon after, but not before he cursed my grandfather with his last breath, vowing that his spirit would never rest until justice was served. The house, a sprawling old mansion with creaky floors and walls that echoed every whisper, felt like a mausoleum. But it was all I could afford, and it held sentimental value. At first, things were quiet, almost peaceful in a strange way. Then, about 2 months in, the disturbances began. It started with the whispers. Late at night, when the world was silent, I'd hear murmurs like someone was talking right into my ear. I dismissed it as the house settling or my overactive imagination. But then came the cold spots, patches in the room where the air would drop to freezing and no heater could warm it up. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing in the hallway. I remember checking my phone for the time. It was 3:03 a.m. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening as those footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. They stopped right outside my door, and then silence. I waited. Breath held, but nothing moved. Just when I thought it was over, my door creaked open on its own. Slowly, as if inviting me to look. I saw nothing, but I felt everything. A wave of dread washed over me, like I was being watched, judged. I slammed the door shut and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found a photograph on my nightstand that hadn't been there before. It was an old, faded image of George, his eyes seeming to bore into mine. I remembered seeing this photo in my grandfather's study, but I hadn't touched it since moving in. How did it get here? Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences grew more direct. Objects would move, my keys would be under my pillow, books would fall off shelves when I walked by. But the most terrifying was when I started finding notes. Written in a shaky, old-fashioned script, they were always the same message. You will pay for his sins. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was sleepwalking, writing these notes myself. But then, one evening, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I set up cameras around the house, particularly in areas where the disturbances were most frequent. That night, I barely slept, waiting for something to happen. And it did. Around 3 a.m., the lights flickered, and my phone buzzed with notifications from the cameras. I watched in horror as the footage showed books flying off shelves, doors opening and closing by themselves, and then, the chilling moment. A figure, translucent and ethereal, moved through my living room. It was George, or at least his spirit. He was writing those notes, moving those objects, his face twisted in a grim satisfaction. The next day, I was at my wit's end. I visited a local historian, hoping to find any record of George or any resolution to their feud. What I found was more disturbing than any ghost story. George's death wasn't natural. He had committed suicide after losing everything, and he had left a diary. In it, he detailed his plan for revenge, not just in life but promised from beyond death. I decided I had to do something. I consulted a medium who suggested a ritual to cleanse the house, to give George's spirit peace. We prepared for the ritual, setting up candles, chanting the words she instructed. The atmosphere in the house thickened, the air almost electric with tension. During the ritual, the medium went into a trance, speaking not in her voice, but in a deep, guttural tone that chilled the room. He wants you to suffer as he did. His peace is your torment, she said, her eyes rolled back, unseeing. Then, chaos. The candles blew out, the windows shattered, and I felt an icy grip on my shoulder, pushing me down. I heard George's voice, clear and venomous. Your blood, your pain, will settle this. The medium collapsed, and the house fell silent. I was left alone, trembling. For weeks, nothing happened. I thought it was over, that maybe the ritual had worked, or perhaps George had just moved on. But then, one day, as I was leaving for work, my car wouldn't start. Frustrated, I decided to walk. As I stepped out, I heard a whisper, "Not yet." And that's when I realized the revenge wasn't just about haunting. It was about waiting. Waiting for the right moment to exact the final toll. I've been living with this since, always looking,